This is M.R. Rangaswami with Indiaspora. We're doing a roundtable on the new education policy that's come about in India a little while ago. And we're going to have a great discussion focused mainly on higher education. I was reading up on it just to do my homework. And this is, I think, the third reform undertaken by the Indian government. And this is the 2020 reforms. Some of the highlights: there are 1.5 million schools in India. There are 8.5 million teachers and 260 million children, students. It's a pretty formidable group of both schools, teachers, and children that need to be educated. Some of the things on the more on the elementary and high school side, I guess, the old education system was 5 + 3 + 3 + 4. Now I think the thing is to go back from age 6 to age 3 to do that preschooling. That's become part of the policy. They want the language to be used to teach the children either to be the mother tongue, the regional language, or the dialect. There's much more inclusion, I think, on the disabled children in school is another one. Also, the integration of arts and sports, which is a welcome aspect of things. And the final is very aspirational, teaching 21st century skills and STEM. I think this is looking forward. So I think these are some of the things that have been introduced, but really we'll get into a deep dive on more aspects of this. It's not to say there's been lots of debate, lots of back and forth between educators, universities, and others during the process. But that's kind of the backdrop. I think we have 4 eminent people to kind of get the discussion going, and really we want to engage the rest of the people as well in the discussion. We have Sumita Ambasta. Sumita's lifelong interest in education and human development. She founded and leads Flowering Tree, which is a US-based education that supports children's education and women's development in Asia. And so she's an expert in this space. Vineet Gupta is an old friend. Vineet was the founding vice chancellor, pro-vice chancellor of Ashoka University. That's getting rave reviews in India as the first liberal arts educational institution. And now is very involved in Plaksha University. And we'll hear quite a bit more about what the goals of Plaksha is. We also have Arjun Bhagat, who is helping them in the US as well. He's a chairman of Calibrated Group. He's an investor, but he's also very, very interested in education. And last but not least, we have our own board member of Indiaspora, Priya Natarajan, who is an astrophysicist at Yale and an academic and an author as well. So we've got a great set of people to get the conversation started. I want to start with first with Sumita. Sumita, you've looked into this quite a bit. You're an educator. So can you kind of give us a quick overview in more detail than what I went through on what is the new education policy and what are the objectives?
Okay, thank you, MR. I want to place the education policy in a little context. And as you rightly pointed out, that this is a very big shift in terms of focus, because one thing that most people don't know in education policy is education has never been a separate ministry or department. It's always been under the Ministry of Human Resource Development. And this has a big history. This is kind of the colonial history, after India became independent, 1947, all education funds and grants came to support technical education. So the way education has been built in developed societies, where there is focus on elementary education, multidisciplinary learning, liberal arts, foundational, and then the technology, that's not the way Indian education had developed, because the focus was always to create employment and to create the manpower who would be able to handle the kind of capital projects that had been developed, which were, the investment in steel plants, technology, and those kinds of things. So that's why the IITs and the IIMs were established with international funding. And, over the years, we've seen focus towards school education, and many developmental economists have pointed out the weakness of elementary and primary education in India. That's where equity is established. And I work in that area, at the grassroots, and the gap between people who have access to good education and most other people who don't have access to education is highest in elementary and primary education. So they've tried to change all those things. The gross enrollment ratio in India for higher education is about 27 to 28%, depending on what's the source of that data. But that's kind of, steady around that. Keep in mind that the Indian higher education field is the third largest in the world after China and US. So even with 27% enrollment, it is still number 3. The goal of this policy is to take that enrollment ratio to 50% by 2040. So this means a lot of different things. So they've created different kinds of flexible models. So if you do 1 year of higher education, you could get a certificate. 2 years, it would be a diploma, and degrees will become 3 or 4 years, which exists as a difference between technology programs are 4 years and, standard bachelors are 3 years. All these things will change depending on what's the goal of the student. This would be grounded by something called an academic bank of credit, which is revolutionary for India. It's pretty normal in the US, but that you can transfer credits from one place to another. But as anybody who's been educated at the undergraduate level in India knows that you cannot do that in India, really. So that's going to change. And that flexibility of moving from one program to another, they hope that it might give people more access, but all this will remain to be seen, because really the challenge in all education is policy looks great on paper. How good are the people who are going to implement it? So I'll point out 2 or 3 things. So one is the academic bank of credit. 2, the regulatory body will be one for all public and private institutions across India, which is, it will replace UGC, state regulatory things. So it'll kind of clean up the process. They haven't set a timeline for it, so it remains to be seen how that will happen. But the goal is certainly laudable and cleaner. On the other side, people would critique saying that it might create, kind of a license or a regulatory bottleneck. So we'll see. The third thing is, as I pointed out about the academic bank of credit, but added to that is a multidisciplinary approach, which is very new to India. I mean, this is the most remarkable thing about this policy, that rather than look at education as arts, science, and commerce, we're going to have higher educational institutions which will be multidisciplinary. So keep in mind, this policy draft was rolled out last year. It's been finalized this year during the COVID. And since in 1986, this is the most revolutionary educational policy to be rolled out. And now the ministry is going to be called Ministry of Education. So the first time in Indian history, we're going to have a Ministry of Education. This, I think, is pretty remarkable. So, people are no more human resources to be used by businesses only. But when we're looking at education, then it's a holistic, multidisciplinary, complete development. So in that sense, MR, I love the word that you use, and I have used it also. It's an aspirational policy. And, as you know, that education is on the concurrent list in India, which means it's on both state and centers, basket of implementation. So it will really depend on how the Ministry of Education will coordinate with the states and implement this. There will be pushbacks, there will be challenges. because of a very simple reason. We've had a very old-fashioned educational system, and change is threatening and change is frightening. And most people who will implement the change have been educated in the old system. So they'll have to give up that thought that, what they studied was probably inferior. And as you know, that's not an easy psychological shift to make. But having said that, I think there is a lot of excitement among younger educators who do see potential, and I would leave it there, and open up to questions.
Sumita, great opening. I think it brought everybody onto the level playing field in terms of understanding the basics. I want to now go to Vineet, and really, Plaksha is a brand new university. It's been formed in a completely different way, and it's focusing, I think, from what I gather, on engineering and STEM and those areas. So maybe Vineet, you've successfully done a liberal arts university before this. So just talk about why Plaksha, why does India need Plaksha as a university? Why is it going to be different? What's the aspirations of Plaksha and how it fits into the aspirational goals of India as well?
Thanks, Amar, and good evening, everyone. As I mentioned, I've been deeply involved in Ashoka University. Arjun, also on the panel, has been a co-traveler in that journey. And Ashoka today is a premier liberal arts university. And why universities in India? Sumita briefly alluded to this. We do have a big higher education challenge in India. Our gross enrollment ratio in India, which means the percentage of students who go to college versus how many should actually be going to college or how many are eligible to go to college. That percentage, which is called the gross enrollment ratio in India, is about 26%. Most of the West is over 65, 70%. The US is closer to 87, 88%. South Korea, as a country which got independent pretty much the same time that India did, is over 90%. China and India were both around 8-9% at the turn of the century. China is now 50%. And Sumita mentioned that new education policy has put out an audacious goal that the gross enrollment ratio should go to 50% by 2035, which means India has to pretty much double its higher education capacity in the next 15 years. So whatever universities we set up, we have about 1,000 universities and 40,000 colleges in India. We will need to double these in the next 15 years. So this is a huge, huge challenge. And I think one of the questions we all keep asking is, what are these universities going to look like? India has some great institutions. We all had the benefit of an outstanding education. The government has and continues to do whatever it can, but clearly much more needs to be done. And some of us especially feel that the sort of private universities or private higher ed universities that the United States created, whether it was an MIT, Stanford, Yale, Harvard, Chicago, and there is a number of them. What will it take India to even get started and create a few? And not just as beacons of excellence, but also as outstanding centers which can really push the system, which can become the models for outstanding education, and they can push both private higher education and higher education to excel. So Plaksha is envisioned as a greenfield technology university. Technology, because we believe that technology could be the biggest enabler that can help India sort of get on the roadmap to success. Technology is influencing every discipline. India does have big problems and big problems at scale. And if technology can be used to solve problems, it can not only help our higher education, but also help the nation as a whole. And there are multiple examples. The telecom revolution in India has made a huge contribution. The way Aadhaar got adopted as a payment stack in India is an example for the rest of the world. That piece of technology innovation has helped millions come out of poverty. So whether it's health, whether it's agriculture, whether it's sustainability, whether it's urban mobility, whether it's manufacturing, I think technology can influence every discipline in India. Now, India has some great technology institutions, the IITs in particular, which have gained a great reputation as great teaching institutions, great quality of students coming out. But I think the use of technology to really solve big problems, research and innovation coming out of technology institutions, that is one piece that has been totally missing. And Plaksha sort of aims to occupy that. A high quality private technology institution, which is at the intersection of doing higher education in deep technologies, but also helping solve some grand challenges for India. That is the big vision for Plaksha. We also hope, sort of just, taking off from where I left. So Plaksha is at that intersection of reimagining engineering education, collapsing the boundaries of engineering disciplines, really helping technology connect with grand challenges. And the last is inculcating an ecosystem for innovation and entrepreneurship. I think we've seen multiple examples of how universities have been a catalyst.
Yeah, I think we lost him. So Mohit, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I can do that. So just picking up from where Vineet left, right? I think one of our, Plaksha's goal is to really evangelize and be a catalyst on the technology side and really take education in multiple ways to young girls and boys in India. And obviously our objective is to differentiate the way engineering has been taught in the past in universities, and then bring in programs which are intersection between technology and some of the grand challenges that India faces, right? Also, whether there's a combination of bio and technology, if you see some of the programs that are being launched, or the whole intersection between business and data science. So the whole, the view is that you have to drive the intersection of what can solve for the future. And a lot of people who went to IITs or BITS, etc. I mean, you had to re-educate yourself in a way when you came out of college or graduates or go to a graduate school. But really, the intent here is to differentiate and bring and nurture girls and boys as they come out with a very different perspective around the engineering side. And I think the length and breadth of what we want to do as we do is touching lives in different ways and different manners. One, what we do is for young girls and boys who are in their 9th, 10th, and 11th grade, really teach them about tinkering, about learning through tinkering. And we run a program called the Young Technical Scholars Program. See, that's not something like a feeder, we believe, to Plaksha, but that's a mission we want to spread education and tinkering in India. Today we have 150 kids, we do it because this has only been 2 years. Our vision and our goal on that Young Technical Scholars Program is to have hundreds of thousands of kids in all kinds of school in India who learn through tinkering, right? And that is from a different levels of society. We don't want to be called an elitist school, right? And I think that's very important as we go on a mission of educating and building young engineers for the future. That's one part of the journey we want to be on. I think the other part of the journey we want to be on is the undergrad programs, which obviously again has to be a lot of focus on different diversity in the university, whether it is gender, whether it is in terms of from different stratas of society. I think the intent of the university is always, and the programs that we'll have, is to educate broader young girls and boys across the country. So I think the objective of the university is also in its soul, that we want to do things differently while teaching engineering education in a different manner and way as it's been taught in the past. So I think that's really how we want to play this out, over the long term. And we have a lot and this is collective philanthropy, as all some of you are aware of, Ashoka. There is no one person who is responsible for this university. It's collective philanthropy. Everybody is contributing for the cause. And our objective is to have the school up and ready about in the fall of 2021, and really drive the program. So I think there's a different ways we are trying to do this, and to Sumita's point and Vineet's point earlier, this is about just, we are really fortunate and want more and more such universities to come up, because India needs these universities. Mm-hmm. A lot of you on this call would have graduated from IITs in India, but that's it. There's nobody else where you would have graduated from an engineering school perspective. But I think our vision is that 10 years out, we can say a lot of kids and a lot of young girls and boys have graduated from Plaksha. So I think that's the whole thesis and vision. We can delve into a lot of things, but I'll let Arjun and Sumita jump in if there's anything, and I'll open up to all of you to really, because this is more, as you said, MR, more of a roundtable and giving us some our perspective.
Thanks, Mohit. I want to go over to Priya, who is at Yale. I guess what you guys are telling me, there was no Elihu Yale who funded the university. Right. So Priya, on that note, I'd love your thoughts. You're an astrophysicist. You've both studied in the US. You've also studied the British system, I think, right? Yeah. Out in the UK. So what do you make of all this? And what is your perspective in terms of the policy, how India can get going? And you've studied in India as well. So
only high school.
Only high school. Okay, so high school in India, college in the US, PhD from
England, Cambridge, yeah.
Cambridge.
Yeah.
And then
back here. Yeah. So I grew up in Delhi. I'm the daughter of academics, and I finished my high school in India. And then I came to MIT on a scholarship to study and did my undergraduate degrees there. And I think one of the reasons I left the country, this is somewhat relevant, is that I had gotten a first taste of research when, this was in the 80s, late 80s. I had a Commodore 64. I knew how to program. And I had started doing research, and there was, because, the history of the Indian educational system, as Sumitra mentioned earlier, right? Unfortunately, they followed the German model in which they decoupled pedagogy from research. So you had these universities, like take the University of Delhi and even the best colleges, right? So the faculty at St. Stephen's, for example, where, I had a sort of a dummy enrollment in case I didn't get my visa or something went wrong, is that, people there were not necessarily expected to be active in research. So we had completely decoupled. They were excellent. So there's excellent teaching across the board in a lot of places. Of course, the quality varies, but there was no research. So, and I wanted to do physics. I did not want to go to an IIT. I wasn't interested in an engineering degree. I knew I wanted to do pure sciences and I wanted to do research. So there was no option at the time. And so I left and I came to the United States, and I came to a place, big thing that attracted me about MIT was their undergraduate research opportunities program, which was already in place in the 1980s. Many universities in the US have now cottoned onto this bandwagon, but they were sort of one of the first places, and that's the kind of thing that brought someone like me into their fold. So vis-a-vis India and what has happened, I have been very pleased to see the ICERs put in place, because the ICER was an attempt to reintegrate research into undergraduate education. And the idea of integrating research is not just to produce thousands and thousands of basic scientists. Of course, it's great. There's a lot of demand for what we do and the skills and the training of mind, but it's the training of the mind. What the kind of training of mind, as you were talking about, learning by tinkering, it's actually learning by doing. So you do something on your own and you figure stuff out. You learn how to figure stuff out on your own. And that's a departure from the sort of traditional kind of, lecture, sort of passive lecture model, which is sort of what happens even at the IITs. So I think I was very glad when that first change happened. And now I'm really glad at the multidisciplinary shift in the policy itself. I think the couple of things in the policy that I particularly like, there are, as you said, some are aspirational, some I'm even surprised that we need to put in our policy that, we really want universal literacy and so on. These should be national aspirations for every citizen of the country without being in a policy. This should have been done a long time ago. Anyway, let's not go there. But I was excited about the ways in which certain kinds of consolidation were done. So, setting up an institution like the National Science Foundation in America that does all the funding, centralized funding, and that that is also nimble and can keep moving as research in science and technology, new areas develop, and, you have new initiatives and so on and so forth. So, there are many things in the policy that I actually like. And, at heart, I know that, the kind of deliberation and detail, a lot of people like me who are Indian that care a lot about India, but were not educated there and educated in different systems were involved. And I know they were consulted for this policy. So I think, when the rubber hits the road is the implementation. So we're going to have to see how that kind of unfolds. But I also, let me come back to, the sort of the multidisciplinary engagement and the fact that, they're going to reimagine what the components of a good education are, a good STEM education. So now from the US, we know that it's not just STEM, but it's STEAM, that it's the powerful combination of the humanities and the sciences that gives the kind of mental training that keeps you open to creative, innovative ideas, new ideas, radical ideas. And that's really what we need to train our young people for. I think one thing that I find remarkable about India is just the level of talent that we have, the depth of talent, the kinds of talent that we have. So I think universities like Plaksha are going in the right direction. My issue is really that, in India, as we saw, the scales are just quite staggering in terms of the number of students. And I think the question is of scale, is of quality, and it's of accessibility. I think, we are realizing now, and I think we should learn from the West. So, I'm saying this because I am at a very privileged institution. And, it has the endowment, which is the GDP, bigger than the GDP of many countries in the world. So I'm very privileged and I'm quite aware of that. And my entire trajectory has been going amongst these incredibly privileged places. So I did my PhD in Cambridge and I was at Trinity College, which is also, I think the third richest entity in the UK, after the Queen and so on. So I think, my perspective comes from having seen the kind of excellence that can grow when you have no resource restrictions, practically speaking. And, this is not the model that we want for India because, we have a completely different set of challenges in the country. And we have a lot more talented people. Even in the US right now, there are all these very important discussions that are happening about privilege and these institutions, who they keep out, how they engineer who's in, and how socioeconomic engineering happens in these kinds of places. So I think my invitation to Plaksha and other universities that are being, and Ashoka and these other universities is, what are you going to be doing for access? Are you going to ensure that, every kid that takes an exam or what entrance, through interviews and a process, will you be able to subsidize education if the kid cannot pay? Because what I would be cautious about is replicating an Ivy League system in terms of the costs, and therefore in terms of the socioeconomic strata that it serves. Yes, there is room. And, if you think of it as an investment, I'm sure that, there'll be a very good return on investment, because there are a lot of Indians now who can afford to pay sort of Ivy League level fees in India or here, and that you will have more than enough talented students. The sort of the Venn diagram of talent and the affordability, that you now have that sort of middle class, upper middle class, wealthy people, enough of a population that you can do that. But I think where we have enormous strength in India, I love your idea of grand challenges. So these are, in the old age, it used to be called appropriate technology that is appropriate to the conditions, local conditions in a place. And I think training people to think about the climate challenges, water resource challenges, all these challenges we can think of. I'm just very curious, and I would like to have a little bit more of an understanding of, this idea. You can have excellent quality places in India because, you have this sort of collective philanthropic effort without the kind of exorbitant pricing and the kind of torquing of privilege that happens, right? So I think what we want to live like America aspires to a post-racial society. In India, we are aspiring to a post-caste society, right? So how do we do all of those things as well?
So Priya,
Thanks, Priya. Very good synopsis of Western education and how it can be applied. One of the things I want to get this to Arjun. So one of the things that I read in the policy that needs to be discussed is now a foreign university can actually set up shop in India, is one of the things that's happening. So Arjun, how do you see collaboration between the West and India if the Yales can set up their own campus and possibly charge Yale-like fees in India and stuff? How does Plaksha want to collaborate? Do they want to partner with the Yales and Harvards and MITs as opposed to them coming all alone? And how do the Indian diaspora collaborate with Plaksha?
Thank you, MR. I'm just going to go a little bit all over the map, and I'll come to your question also. And if I don't, please remind me. But let me just start by saying that one of the reasons we are doing Plaksha is that the way the world is going, knowledge by far is the most valuable thing in terms of future GDP, future success as an economy, as a culture, so on and so forth. At this point, between big data, AI, machine learning, robotics, it's a race between the United States and China, and Europe is a distant third, and we are somewhere not even showing up on the map. And part of why we want to do Plaksha is to be able to get India there on the high table. It's really an important thing. To your point, Priya, as you said, we are 1.4 billion people. Statistically, even if you don't believe that we are genetically superior, blah, 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 in mathematics, forget all of that. Just purely statistically, the few top 1,000 kids are just going to be absolutely world-class. And IIT has shown over the years that even when the education may not be at par with their American counterpart in the or Western counterparts in the 70s and the 80s, it didn't stop IIT kids from going global and being able to compete toe-to-toe against.
But it was a very narrowly defined kind of exceptionalism.
Yes.
Those kids were very exceptional because they were able to crack a test. So I think we have learned a lot since the IITs have been established. There is something about the kind of mind that can crack a test and excel in taking tests in a very passive system. And then there's the kind of mind that I think you want to get to, which is the kind of mind that is curious and is going to learn by tinkering and doing.
And that's why we are not doing something as monochromatic as the IIT
Exactly.
exam, by no question. But, and to your point, we did this with Ashoka and we're doing this with Plaksha. We are very, very, very determined not to make this a needs-based or a money situation. If a kid gets in, and this has been true for Ashoka from its formation, and it's going to be the story with Plaksha, even in the very first years while we ourselves are struggling with our own capital raise and trying to get the university going, we will not have a kid not come in because of a lack of need. That we will not do. The other thing that we are doing, as Mohit pointed out, because we are not run by 3 or 5 or 7 sort of big guys, it's a dispersed network of philanthropists. The setup between our mindset and the dispersion of power, if you will, or whatever, we will have a situation where there's no inside road. I know the founder, I know the owner, I know the lala. That stuff is just not available. So I think so the structure is in place. We've got a supply where a few thousand kids across the country, and finding a methodology to identify them, we will continue to keep honing on. But to the extent we can pick the best and the brightest, and we can get a guy from a small village in Bihar or Mizoram or something, give him the chance or her the chance to become somebody who can then go out and conquer the world. There's no reason why, I mean, if in Ashoka, we already, as MR pointed out, in a decade, we are the #1 university for economics in the country today. There's no reason why we can't do something even quicker in Plaksha than we did with Ashoka. If we can get the right structure, the right academic capabilities provided, take the best and brightest, set up an ecosystem, which we're talking about, which is set up potentially that people start companies or do stuff right nearby. So the whole, Stanford Bay Area model, those things are all playing in our minds. But I think we really have a shot at being able to build all of that today.
So I just want to make one quick point that I'm sure you have paid attention to, that I think this whole definition of who is the brightest and who is the best, the dimensionality and the facets of a kid, all the facets that need to be taken into account have really expanded. And I hope that, when you're talking about the best kid from Mizoram or whatever, that you've really exploded that very limited understanding of what defines the best, because I think that's a place where we are bleeding talent in India.
So Priya, here's the thing. We were talking to some guys in MIT and explaining the Plaksha sort of vision, and not just vision, but what we were doing. And the guys there said, you know what? It's amazing that you guys can talk and think like this, even in an institution like us, because we have got so much history and so much baggage and so much momentum.
Yeah.
I can't do the stuff that you're talking about.
Yeah.
So I would reach out to you, Priya, and say, if you've been immersed in this is precisely the kind of stuff we need someone like you to come on board and give us that guidance, because none of us believe that we've got the answer. And if you've got expertise and interest in this stuff, we would absolutely love to get your involvement, because that's the kind of stuff that allows us to succeed. And the beauty of the whole thing that we've done with Ashoka, with Plaksha, is this network effect. We'll be 70, 80 of us. We're not 3 or 5 of us. And each time, because somebody knows you, that you get involved, and you know somebody who then gets involved, we can bring the value of our individual networks to create best of breed that even a multi-billionaire cannot do, because he's only got or she's only got access to their span of whatever they've got, right? So I think if you think of it structurally, and then I'll come to the last point. Structurally, our whole model is to go out there and through networking, bring in people who then can bring in other people who can, and nobody sits here, nobody's the big shot, nobody gets to make all the decisions. And I think if you do get involved, any of you do, you'll find that there aren't many big egos here. People aren't looking for recognition or their name somewhere or be at the head of the table. We're all just doing this because we think it's a really worthwhile cause. So voices get heard and they get a chance to make a difference. Emma, and I'll stop after this. Emma, going to your question, the one thing we did with Ashoka and we're doing here is we're trying, it's that originally ISB started this in Hyderabad, where this idea was there are so many bright people across the world, many of them of Indian origin, sitting around being professors and teachers and so on and so forth, who are at a certain age, they'd love to go back to India. The kids are young, they get a chance to maybe have their kids get immersed in India for 6 months or a year during their sabbatical. So come over, become a professor, start tying up. So one of the strengths of this structure is we start doing a lot of joint ventures and sort of tie-ups. And we do it with not 1 or 2 or 4, we'll do it with 8, 10, 12 universities and within universities, within departments. So the idea is that we get this potential for cross-fertilization. And again, if Yale wants to come in and do whatever Yale wants to do, anything that increases the educated pool in India, we're not trying to we're not looking at this as a competition. It'll only be additive for us. So, but we are very clear, we are not going to be a homegrown, made in India story. It's going to be precisely the flowering that comes from our networks and contacts across universities, across philanthropy, across anyway, that's.
Great.
So may I
Thanks, Arjun.
add something to that?
Sorry?
Yeah, I'd like to add something.
Oh, please, Sumita. Yeah, please go ahead.
So I live in Singapore and New York. So, I live between these two countries, and I've seen so many international universities try to set up in Singapore in the last 10, 15 years. And what's happened? The most successful, Priya, to your point, has been the Yale NUS College.
Yeah.
Yes, and we have talked to them and consulted with them about the admissions process and how they've tried to do things. So, we've been having these dialogues with even universities in Singapore, apart from the universities in the US. But we also recognize that in terms of affordability and access, in India, the cost the ratios just work very, very differently. So even when, international universities will look at setting up in India, and I'm sure they all will. I mean, University of Chicago has a setup. Many universities have, programs that they run out of India. But to run an entire undergraduate program will become a real cost challenge.
Yeah.
So we are aware of this. Our job is to provide something that, Indian population can afford. And if they cannot, then we have given a lot of scholarships for the Plaksha Tech Leaders Fellowship. And, I have mentored students, girls who have gotten 100% scholarship. Otherwise, they couldn't have afforded that program. And in spite of that economic challenge, they have chosen jobs. And this is something very encouraging, and you would all like to hear this. I really track this whole placement thing. So many of them have joined departments in the government where they have the opportunity to build bigger solutions than taking, the quick next corporate job, which is kind of very interesting because they're motivated to solve the grand challenges. And Priya, again, to your point, that whole pedagogy versus content approach, we were talking about it 3 years ago, and now NEP is talking about it. So we feel we are very well placed with NEP. That's been our goal all along, to develop a more pedagogy-based curriculum. And, to that goal, we've been working with educators, and we'd really like to invite you to join that discussion, that committee, to help us think better and deeper.
Because I mean, I
And
think one of the quick question that I had for all of you is that, my understanding is that one of the big challenges I know from Yale and US was faculty recruitment,
yes,
and especially in the STEM fields. So, just getting people on the faculty to teach, physics with all the laboratories, and chemistry with all the kind of labs and hands-on stuff that you need to set up. So there's a challenge there, right? As well. Because as you all rightly mentioned, you want to get people who have had exposure to different ways of thinking, or have come through the Indian system and still are open-minded and so on. So I can see that, there could be challenges on sort of multiple levels, right? Access challenges as well as.
and we've
Absolutely.
been working very
Interject here. I want to get, sorry,
ahead.
Sumit, can we try and see if there's some questions from
Sure.
some of the other guys who've been a little silent, either Ajay, Rashima, and Subha, or Harshul on the phone, or Prashant, or, Gurpreet.
I think Prashant has actually submitted a question on the chat that I saw.
Okay.
Which is
great.
really
So
relevant.
MR, I can do it after that. I'll ask my question.
Okay, so let's ask Prashant's question but that's an easy one. Is English the medium of instruction for all classes? And they said yes. So let's ask a tougher question, Prashant.
No. But the thing is, this is something that actually is.
It's a very important question.
Because yes, I know, and it's ironic, I say it because I built my career. The last two companies have been outsourcing companies, which have relied on the Indians knowing English. But one of my learning over the last 15 years is, like MR, like you, and like a lot of the other people on this call, I went to sort of relatively elite schools. I grew up reading Enid Blyton and all the other stuff and everything else, and I went to Loyola College. But the thing is, as I've delved deeper into India and talked to my employees who are coming from slightly more modest backgrounds, here is my takeaway, that I think 90% of Indians have no hope of becoming a lawyer or a doctor or a professor or a top engineer because they don't know English. All this talk about, hey, listen, that, in other words, somebody who's grown up in a Tamil medium or a Gujarati medium, or even like say in Mizoram, in the local language there, them getting into an IIM or even like, becoming a top lawyer is next to nothing. So that's like we're excluding 90% of the population of the country. So that to me is something that really, and it's staggering, because even I go to Chennai now, right? And I visit companies there.
No, I think,
The employees go ahead.
Prashant, I think one of the things that you are pointing out is maybe Plaksha should really think about having an equalizer, English as a second language kind of capsule that they do to level, the kids once they get in. So the testing to get them in should not be contingent on proficiency in English per se, but once they do get in, I think English is here to stay. I don't live in India. I haven't lived there for more than 35 years now, but I think it would be fair to say that, it will still remain sort of the language with the currency for power and influence and success, and globally integrating and networking with everyone else. So I was just curious whether you guys had thought about that, how to level.
So if I can,
And if I could just step in there, just one thing.
One second, Prashant, quickly finish and then let Vineet respond.
Okay,
Prashant,
and it's also, the thing is, it is possible also that, it's one of the many problems facing India. And I don't want to sort of just, if Plaksha, it's not providing anything else, that's fine. Plaksha can't solve every single educational problem India is facing. It's something, if it's not within your sandbox, fine, so be it.
Yeah. Sorry, 1 second, Rahul. I'll come to you next, Rahul, but let Vineet finish up.
No, I think, Prashant, the question you raise is, I think, very, very important. And you're absolutely right. Perhaps Plaksha can't solve for everything. We have to pick up the problems we can solve as a collective group. And clearly we have to pick up one medium And here the choice for us was English. Now, I should also mention, and Priya brought up this point, that does this mean we will not take students who are not good in English? No, it doesn't mean that. Right? And while
Got it.
We're losing
Rahul, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you, Amar. So great discussion. Very interesting, very important topic. So I think it was Sumita had mentioned that, you know, in India is going to have to double its education capacity in 15 years. You know, it's great to hear that, you know, Plaksha is building out university and infrastructure, but where's India going to get all the teachers and the professors? And not just at the you know, the college level, but also, you know, grade school, high school. I mean, because that has the biggest effect on students, right? You know, I mean, certainly their environment, but who's teaching them?
So Rahul, that's a great question. I think, you know, when we thought about Plaksha 5-6 years ago, you know, getting students, getting a lot of people to collectively contribute to building the university was the easy part. I mean, it's actually the easier part. But I think getting the right academia and the right teachers is the toughest part. And that was something which worried us, right? So, you know, there are two parts to your question. One, you know, there is now efforts being made across countries, across the country, and by different groups to really up the game on how do you really you know, drive and have and expand the whole pool of the teaching staff. You know, it's just not about colleges, it's all about also the K-12 program, right? I mean, there is a lot of effort being done today that how do you bring in more educators and people and teach the teachers who are teaching today and for the future. How do you bring in more insight into the K-12 program? So, and there are a lot of institutions, including people from Ashoka, who are trying to build the whole K-12 deep program on how do you really train the teacher program, right? So I think some of that is starting to build up, right? It's a journey, and you know, the expanse of the country and the number of people we have, it's going to take a time, and you have to really build around that. You know, for us, it's always been collectively, all of us who have been involved to get the right academia to teach, and Priya, to your point, and Rahul, to your point. And we've been working that through and to ensure that there is good quality. So our concerted efforts have been to look at teachers who are in the US or in Singapore and in India who can come and teach at the university, either for 2 years or 3 years, maybe not for 5-10 years, but 2 to 3 years. And, you know, we are getting some little success, I would say, in our whole academic hiring program. And we really have someone right now in the US full-time focused on that, and bringing and trying to bring in some really good talent, I would say, to come and teach. It's a tough one. And we are working that through both domestically and globally to get the best talent. But to your point, Rahul, I think grounds up, K-12 and up, I think there are more and more people who are trying to build more capability in the teaching area as much as they're building capability in educating the students. I think quality education is linked to, you know, how well and good teachers you have, as you all know. And our endeavor is to not ramp up and have thousands of kids and don't have teachers. In fact, our aspiration is to have only 150 to 200 kids in the first year, so that we have a really good focus from our teachers and link it to the number of teachers and academicians we can hire or get on board onto the program, and not just go crazy and accelerate. You know, Vineet's a real expert on this, and we keep on losing him. But when he can...
I think Gurpreet had a question, so let's get to the next, because we're running out of time.
Yeah, very quickly, I'll mention I've had the fortune in the last week to visit both Ashoka and Plaksha personally. Yeah,
Yeah.
I spent over 2 hours in Ashoka. I talked to a few students who recently graduated and who live in Chandigarh. And then I also went to Plaksha, did a very deep tour. And I talked to a bunch of founders like Mohit, Vineet. I also reached out to Pramath. So, and I'm very familiar. I'm a product of the Indian education system and the US education system. I've also, done visiting lectures at ISBs, both of them. So I'm familiar of this modern thing. The biggest challenge which I found, firstly, I'll say that the Ashoka and Plaksha model, it's absolutely global class. So in terms of level of education and experience, I told my brother Gurdeep, I said, I felt like going back and admitting myself in Ashoka, and starting my education all over again. But then I had the I don't want to use the word misfortune, but I was also had the view into, I visited two other universities in the area. One is called Chandigarh University, other is called Chandigarh Group of Colleges. And Chandigarh University has 14,000 engineering students. Okay. And the misfortune is that evening when I was coming back, the guy who was driving Uber was an engineer graduate from Chandigarh University. So the big challenge that I see also is that number of 26, 27% of enrollment that we are talking about today. That number is actually does not have a floor. It is totally inflated, where a lot of the people are coming out of these kind of, just in North India, there are 30, 40 colleges like that, that are handing out degrees, and these people cannot get any real job because they don't have any real qualifications. So I actually feel when this education policy is rolled out, we might going to see, and standards are going to be enforced in terms of portability of credits. I think our numbers will shrink very significantly in the numbers we are counting towards 50 to up to 2040. So my challenge to Plaksha, Ashoka, and any other education venture that we are doing is, how are we going to scale? But if you're going to scale, how are we going to scale with quality in order to reach that number of 50%? So, you have a lot more people with a lot of education here. I'm willing to do my part, but I think that is one very key challenge we need to look at, because there is going to be significant contraction before we can actually see any expansion.
Got it. Quick question from Raj and Anna Asava. You guys had planned Plaksha pre-pandemic. So what is the new model? Can you take on more than 150 students? Raj, you want to ask the question? More detail? Go ahead, Raj. Unmute.
Thank you, Amar. Thank you. I don't want to take too much time, friends, but my question is, education, how we impart education and how our children and students consume the whole learning process is changing as we speak, right? Pandemic has now basically changed that learning model. And I don't think we are going to go back to the traditional way of learning. It is going to be some kind of a hybrid way of learning. Also, we have been stuck in this K through 12 plus 4 plus 2 model for decades now. Isn't there an opportunity here for us to dramatically transform the way the whole education system, where everything from just-in-time modules, just-in-time learning, to maybe a whole rethinking of the education model and the lifelong learning model should be done? Yeah. Is that something you think is the mission of Plaksha, or a government mission, or a joint mission between government, industry, and academia?
Yeah, I think, Raj, just to add to that, and we'll let someone from Plaksha respond, is they're talking of 150 students in batch one, right? Can this new post-pandemic model make that 15,000 or 150,000 students having access to something like this? Just something to throw out at Plaksha. Thoughts? Who wants?
So Raj and Amar, I think, like everybody on this call, the pandemic obviously threw all of us out of gear, right? And got us to start thinking about disruption and being the disruptor. We do believe that because we have a playbook and we are on a greenfield mode of building the university, we can be the disruptor, right? And we have a team, and one of our co-founders, Manas Faloria, is really leading that charge. I'm saying what can be done differently and how can we be their disruptor. We've been talking amongst ourselves that, you know, while the campus might have 8 to 10,000 students at some point of time, but can we educate about 100,000 plus students across the country in a more digital world? Just as an example, right? I talked about this Tinkering Young Technical Scholars program that we run every year. I don't know what happened.
Is someone putting up a slide? Yeah.
Can you just, hello?
Presentation being shown.
No, we don't need that, Nitika. Sorry.
So go ahead, Mohit. Yeah.
Yeah. And look, this whole summer program that we run for these young 9 to 11 kids, we completely did it online this time and shipped kits to the kids in their homes and did it through video, audio, AR, all kind of new tech, right? Experimented with that this summer, right? Like all of us are trying to do in our university this summer. And we run today our technical fellowship program, which is an online program. So what Manas and the team are doing is exactly to your point, Raj, that how do we now we were reimagining education a bit when our foundation name is Reimagine Higher Education, right? That's our foundation name. That's where we started from. And we are now reimagining that how this can be further evangelized and we can be the disruptor in that space. I mean, we want to do that. Look, and we want to collaborate with a lot of people on this call, outside this call, to say, look, how can we do it? So it's been, we're still in the pandemic. It's been 6 months. And I think we are exactly, Raj, to your point, thinking that way already. And I think Vineet put it on the group on the chat. We are now dreaming of not educating 8,000 kids, but 100,000 kids across the country as we go forward, right? That's our dream. And hopefully in the next 4 to 5 years, we have that education platform, which does a combination of digital learning as well as classroom learning, right? And we are collaborating with edX at MIT Howard, with Anant and his team. We've got Sanjay Sarna, who's helping us think through that. Anant's on our advisory board. And, you know, like they have created the whole edX platform between MIT and Howard and other institutions. We're saying, how do you create a combination of what's being done and what you do to really become that disruptor in this space? It will take time. You know, we are in our early days on that, but we are dreaming that way. I would just leave it at that.
Great. I know we're running over time, but I just want to accommodate 1 or 2 more questions. Shubha, you had a question. Do you want to ask it? If you unmute yourself, please.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. This is a great discussion, and you know, being part of Pratham, I'm familiar with, you know, how different people are actually doing different things to improve the quality of education in India. So one of the things I put both my questions in the chat. So it's a great concept. You know, the first thing that came to my mind is Three Idiots, right? You know, the school that they show at the end of the movie. So is it possible, like, you know, your vision is really great, you know, 8,000 to 100,000. Is it possible to use the existing infrastructure, you know, whether it's a government infrastructure or probably unused infrastructure from private sector as well, to reach, to build it at scale? I mean, is that something that, you know, are you thinking about?
I'm just going to respond quickly, Shobha. I think a lot of these expensive colleges that are built are going to go defunct. And, you know, there would be an opportunity to take over. It's like data center to cloud, where you buy the data centers. So sorry, I'm a technologist, so I always come up with those analogies. Just a thought.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep. Like you said, there's so many engineering colleges that are probably going to really go broke with this stuff. So there's a opportunity to consolidate that in a sense, right? One last question from Prashant. I think he asked it in the chat. What is the real objective of, you said of Plaksha, you said reimagining education, but that's so broad. What do you want to focus on?
Whether you want to go take that, Smita? I think we lost it. So look, I think what we're trying to do is work and look at solving some of India's grand challenges, right? And work through and collaborate with academia, institutions in India, corporates, and the government to really solve for some of those challenges, right? And if you look at what we're trying to do is to focus on healthcare, clean energy, environment. So we've started what we call is the Center for Clean Energy. And the objective of the Center of Clean Energy is to really collaborate with the corporate sector as well as the government to really drive the whole focus on clean energy. So I think there are certain things. So while the programs will teach biotech or data science, but they cut across, you know, if you look at a very corporate-ish world, the vertical structures of healthcare, clean energy, digital agriculture, I think that there's a lot of focus around all those areas, right? So one of the big things we do, and if you look at even how we thought about this, or how we had started to think about this, was really to solve for some of the India's grand challenges. Smita, do you want to really jump in here if I'm missing something here?
Yeah, Smita, do you want to, Sumita, you want to jump in because we got to close this out pretty soon. So
I think you're on
mute. Unmute, please.
That's a statement of the year, right? You're on mute.
Yeah, that's absolutely. Go ahead, Sumita.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to Raj's points that you've placed in the chat and also add to what Mohit's saying. I think we are really looking to re-engineer the way we look at education, how it's delivered, what's the content, you know, what exactly students are going to do with that education. And you know, when we look at solving challenges, the delivery, the way people brought up the pandemic, you know, whether we take students, you know, our students have shown the first cohort in Plaksha Tech Leaders Fellowship that they're very open to thinking about these things. So I think what we are doing is really creating that kind of an environment where the group of people, whether it's the philanthropists, the students, and the faculty, the combination that will come together will create new ways to look at both what is delivered and what it does. So I think our biggest goal is to create that kind of environment.
Great. So I think I'm just checking about 12 minutes over time. I know some of the guys on the East Coast, it's past, it's getting late. And so we could go on and on. This is incredible. I think what Plaksha is doing is super impressive. The fact that you have multiple donors, it's not one Mr. Yale that funded your school is good. There are a lot more people who
Yale himself did not. He gave 52 pounds.
I know, but that was our money from India that went to.
That's right, from Madras presidency.
It was on the backs of Indians. So absolutely, but in your case, you have lot more people. Like I said, the Indiaspora group you saw here is very engaged. We've had people from all over the US actually actively participating and staying through the program. So Priya, once again, I'm glad you came on to bring the US perspective, and I want to thank the Plaksha team as well. I think you're doing phenomenal work. I think the pandemic is only giving you a more disruptive status in some sense to kind of think outside the box. You're already thinking outside the box. Now you got to think outside the galaxy or something to get this thing going in India. And so really want to thank everyone for attending this roundtable, and we will see you on another event soon, and we'll keep you updated on Plaksha as well. And we'll send updates from to everyone.
Thank you very much. Very
Thank
excited.
you,
Thank you, guys.
About
Kumar,
Plaksha.
thank you for putting this
Thank you,
together.
everybody.
And,
Everyone.
Bye-bye.
Good job, team.
Bye-bye.
bye.
Stay well.
Bye.